You were taught that if you were kind, patient, helpful, forgiving, and understanding, people would respect you. But look at what actually happened. They called you sweet, but ignored your boundaries. They praised your goodness, but overlooked your value. They appreciated your presence, but never protected your time. And slowly, without even realizing it, you became someone others could use without consequence. And the most painful part is, you believed that if you just became a little more patient, a little more selfless, a little more understanding, eventually they would see your worth. But they didn't, because respect does not grow where self-abandonment is rewarded. And that is the truth most people never admit to themselves. Nice people are not disrespected because they are kind. They are disrespected because their kindness is mixed with fear, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of losing people, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as selfish for choosing themselves. So what looks like virtue on the surface is often insecurity underneath, and human psychology can feel that difference instantly. People can sense when your kindness is a choice, and when it is a strategy to be liked, and the moment your behavior feels like a strategy, your value begins to drop in their eyes because the world does not respect goodness alone. It respects self-possession. It respects emotional control. It respects the person who can be warm without being weak, calm without being submissive, and kind without being easy to manipulate. Most people who are too nice confuse being liked with being respected. They grow up believing that safety comes from pleasing others, so they become agreeable. They avoid conflict. They say yes when they want to say no. They smile when they feel disrespected. They keep the peace even when it costs their dignity. And for a while, it seems to work. People like them. People compliment them. People say they are rare. But if you look closer, those same people do not take them seriously. They do not protect their boundaries. They do not value their time, because being liked often means you are non-threatening, while being respected means you are not easily bent, and many people would rather keep you pleasant than acknowledge your power, because power creates discomfort, and comfort is what most people protect. So they reward the version of you that is easy to manage, not the version of you that is hard to control. And the moment you stop organizing your personality around being liked, everything begins to shift. You speak less, but with more intention. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You stop apologizing for your boundaries, and suddenly people feel something different in your presence. Not because you became colder, but because you became harder to negotiate with, because you are no longer trying to earn your place in every interaction. People do not consciously decide to disrespect you. They simply observe what you tolerate. They notice how quickly you respond, how often you say yes, how easily you forgive, how rarely you push back. And from that, they form a silent conclusion about your limits, not about your intentions, but about your boundaries. And once someone believes there are no real consequences for crossing your line, they will keep testing it, not always out of malice, but out of human nature. Because people move according to what is allowed, not just what is right. If every time someone disappoints you, you remain available. If every time someone crosses a line, you soften it. If every time someone takes advantage, you give them another chance without requiring change, then you are teaching them how to treat you. You are teaching them that access to you is guaranteed, even when respect is not. And that is not kindness. That is self-erasure, because healthy people respect boundaries out of understanding, and unhealthy people respect boundaries out of consequence. But in both cases, the boundary is what protects you. A boundary is not punishment. It is information. It tells people what behavior is acceptable and what is not. It tells them how close they can come without losing access. And most importantly, it tells you who respects you and who only values your convenience. And many nice people are afraid of this moment, because once they set a boundary, they risk losing the illusion that everyone around them cares, but that illusion is already costing them their peace. And the longer they hold on to it, the more they lose themselves trying to maintain it. One of the biggest habits that destroys respect is over-explaining. Nice people feel the need to justify everything, why they said no, why they need space, why they feel hurt, why they change their mind. And they believe that if they explain enough, they will be understood. But psychologically, Over-explaining sends a different message. It signals that you are afraid your decision will not be accepted, so you try to make it easier for others to agree with you, and in doing that, you place your choices on trial. When your choices are on trial, other people feel invited to judge them, to question them, to push against them, and the more you explain, the more room you create for negotiation. But a clear decision does not need excessive explanation. A simple no, a simple boundary, a simple shift in behavior is often more powerful than a long justification, because clarity creates authority while over-explaining creates doubt, and people respond differently to each. The person who constantly explains themselves appears unsure, even if they are not, while the person who speaks with clarity and restraint appears grounded, even if they say very little. And this is where the shift begins, not in becoming louder, not in becoming aggressive, but in becoming precise, in understanding that your words are not there to convince everyone. They are there to express your decision, and once your decision is made, it does not need to be defended endlessly. There is a quiet power in saying less, in allowing your actions to carry the weight of your intentions, in letting people sit with your boundaries without immediately softening them for comfort. Because the moment you stop rushing to make everyone else comfortable, you start creating space for yourself to exist without negotiation. And that space is where respect begins. And for many people, this is uncomfortable at first, because they are used to being understood by everyone. They are used to being liked by everyone. They are used to being the one who keeps things smooth. But smoothness often comes at the cost of authenticity, and authenticity will always feel disruptive to those who benefited from your silence. So the question is no longer how to be liked more. The question is, how much of yourself are you willing to lose just to remain acceptable? Because the answer to that question determines everything. It determines your boundaries, your relationships, your self-respect, and ultimately the way people see you. Because the world does not treat you based on your intentions, it treats you based on your patterns. And if your pattern is self-sacrifice without limits, then that is the role you will be placed into again and again, until you decide to change it, not by becoming someone else, but by finally becoming someone who does not abandon themselves for approval. This is where the transformation begins, not in becoming less kind, but in becoming more aware, more intentional, more selective. Because kindness without awareness is easily used, but kindness with awareness becomes something else entirely. It becomes presence. It becomes control. It becomes quiet. Power that does not need to be announced, only felt. Another reason nice people lose respect is because they confuse emotional generosity with emotional strength. They believe that being there for everyone, absorbing everyone's problems, fixing every situation, and constantly maintaining harmony is what makes them valuable, but what actually earns respect is emotional control, the ability to remain calm without becoming cold, the ability to listen without collapsing, the ability to care without losing yourself in someone else's chaos. Because people do not trust what is endlessly accommodating. They trust what feels stable. When you are always overextending, always reacting, always trying to fix everything, people can feel your internal pressure, even if your intentions are pure. They sense that your emotions are easily pulled, easily influenced, easily affected by others, and that makes you predictable, and predictability, in this way, lowers your perceived strength, because it signals that your inner state depends too much on external behavior. But when you are grounded, when you are selective with your energy, when your emotions are not easily hijacked by every situation, people feel something different. They feel your self-command. They feel that you are not easily shaken, and that creates a form of psychological gravity that naturally draws respect. Nice people often become emotional absorbers. They carry other people's stress, other people's frustration, other people's confusion, and they do it silently, believing that this makes them strong. But over time, this creates exhaustion, resentment, and a loss of identity. Because when you are constantly absorbing others, you stop having space for yourself. And the more you lose yourself, the less solid you appear to others, and the less solid you appear, the less seriously you are taken, because people respect those who are internally stable, not those who are endlessly available. There is a difference between compassion and absorption. Compassion says, I care about what you are going through, but I remain grounded in myself. Absorption says, your emotions now control my state. Your chaos now becomes my burden. And the second one does not create respect, it creates dependency. And dependency, when it is one-sided, slowly erodes your value, because the more you become someone's emotional support without limits, the more they begin to see you as a function, not as a person. The person who is respected is not the one who sacrifices themselves the most. It is the one who can remain steady when others are unstable. It is the one who does not panic, does not overreact, does not chase validation when things feel uncertain. And this level of emotional control sends a powerful signal. It tells people that you are not easily manipulated, not easily influenced, not easily controlled, and that alone changes how they interact with you. There is also a harsh truth that many people avoid. The more available you are, the less valuable you appear. Not because people are intentionally trying to devalue you, but because the human mind adapts quickly to what is always accessible. What is always there becomes normal. What is normal becomes expected, and what is expected is rarely appreciated at a deeper level, and this is why many nice people feel invisible. They give so much, but receive so little, because they made themselves constantly available before anyone proved they deserved that access. If your time is always open, if your attention is always free, if your support is always guaranteed, then your presence stops feeling special. It stops carrying weight. It becomes something people assume will always be there. And once something is assumed, it is rarely protected, rarely respected, and rarely valued the way it should be, because value is often tied to selectivity, to the understanding that not everything is accessible at all times. Scarcity, when it is natural and not forced, communicates self-worth. It shows that your time is structured, your energy is limited, your attention is intentional. And when people sense that you are not endlessly available, they begin to approach you differently. They become more aware of how they interact with you, more careful with their behavior, more respectful of your presence, not because you demanded it, but because your behavior signaled that access to you is not automatic. Many nice people struggle with this because they fear what will happen if they stop being available. They fear losing people, losing connections, losing their role in others' lives. But the deeper fear is this: what if people only stayed because I was convenient? What if my value was tied to how much I gave and not who I am? And that question is uncomfortable, but it is necessary because it reveals whether your relationships are built on genuine connection or on quiet dependency. Another pattern that keeps nice people stuck is their loyalty to people who repeatedly disrespect them. They defend behavior that hurts them. They minimize actions that cross their boundaries. They creating replinatings to make sense of what they feel. They say things like they are just going through a hard time. They didn't mean it like that. They will change eventually. And while empathy is important, it can become a way to avoid facing reality. Because if you fully accept that someone is consistently disrespecting you, then you may have to act on it. You may have to confront them, create distance, or even let go. And that is what many people are truly avoiding, not conflict, but loss. So they hold on to who someone used to be, or who they hope they will become, instead of accepting who they are showing themselves to be in the present, and in doing that, they slowly disconnect from their own reality. Repeated disrespect is not confusion. It is information. It is a pattern that tells you exactly what someone is willing to do and what they are not willing to change. And the longer you ignore that information, the more you teach yourself that your feelings are not important, that your boundaries are flexible, that your self-respect can be negotiated. And over time, that becomes your identity, someone who endures instead of someone who decides. Many nice people believe that if they love enough, if they understand enough, if they wait long enough, things will eventually change. But behavior changes through awareness and action, not through silent tolerance. And when you continue to tolerate the same pattern without consequence, you are not helping the other person grow. You are helping the pattern continue. The truth is, you cannot build a healthy connection on top of repeated self-betrayal. Because every time you ignore your own boundary to preserve the relationship, you weaken your sense of self. And the weaker your sense of self becomes, the less stable you appear. And the less stable you appear, the less respect you receive. Not because you are unworthy, but because your behavior signals that your limits are unclear. At some point, you have to stop asking why someone is treating you a certain way and start asking why you are allowing it to continue, because that shift in perspective changes everything. It moves you from being reactive to being responsible for your own experience. And responsibility in this sense is not blame, it is power. It is the understanding that your standards shape your environment. The moment you stop editing reality to maintain attachment, the moment you stop justifying behavior that consistently hurts you, the moment you accept what is actually happening instead of what you hope will happen, you begin to see clearly, and clarity is the beginning of change. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend it does not exist. And when you stop pretending, you stop tolerating. And when you stop tolerating, your behavior changes, your boundaries become stronger, your responses become more intentional, and people feel that shift immediately because your energy is no longer available for misuse. And that alone begins to reshape how others interact with you. This is where many people experience resistance, not just from others but from themselves, because change disrupts familiarity, and familiarity, even when it is painful, can feel safer than the unknown. But staying in a pattern that slowly erodes your self-respect is far more damaging than stepping into discomfort for the sake of growth, because in the end, respect is not something you ask for. It is something your behavior invites, and when your behavior begins to reflect clarity, boundaries, emotional control, and self-definition, people respond differently, not because you forced them to, but because the version of you they once knew is no longer available in the same way. And that changes everything. At the core of everything, there is one pattern that explains why nice people struggle to gain respect. They live as performers. They shape themselves based on what others expect. They adjust their tone, their behavior, their reactions, their boundaries, all in an effort to maintain approval. And beneath all of it is one silent question. What do I need to be so I am not rejected? And the moment your identity is built around that question, you lose your center, you lose your clarity, you lose the ability to stand firm in who you are without constantly checking how others might respond. When you live like this, your personality becomes reactive, not defined. You are not acting from a place of self-understanding. You are acting from a place of social calculation, reading the room, adjusting yourself, softening your edges, suppressing your truth, all to remain acceptable. And while this may keep things smooth on the surface, it creates something unstable underneath, because you are no longer rooted in your own values. You are rooted in other people's comfort. And when people sense that your identity is flexible in this way, they unconsciously treat you as someone who can be shaped, negotiated, or influenced, not necessarily out of intention, but because your behavior signals that your boundaries are not fixed. And when boundaries are not fixed, respect becomes unstable. Because people do not know where you stand, and if they do not know where you stand, they will test where you bend. Respect is built on self-definition, on the clarity of knowing what you allow, what you do not allow, what you value, what you refuse, and when these things are consistent, people begin to understand you, not just like you, but understand you. And understanding creates a different kind of interaction, one that is based on recognition rather than convenience. Many nice people are afraid of this shift because self-definition often leads to friction. It leads to moments where others feel uncomfortable, moments where expectations are not met, moments where people react negatively to your boundaries, and that reaction can feel like rejection. But in reality, it is often just a response to change, because when you stop being who people are used to, they have to adjust, and not everyone is willing to do that. This is why some relationships become strained when you start setting boundaries, not because you are doing something wrong, but because the dynamic is changing. And the people who benefited from your lack of limits may resist that change, not always consciously, but through subtle pressure, guilt, or withdrawal. And this is where many people fall back into old patterns because they mistake discomfort for failure. But discomfort is often a sign of growth. It is the signal that something is shifting, that you are no longer operating from the same patterns. And while it may feel unstable at first, it is necessary because without that shift, nothing changes. You remain in the same cycle, giving more than you receive, tolerating more than you should, and slowly losing yourself in the process. Another critical shift is understanding the difference between being kind and being passive. Kindness is active, it is intentional, it is grounded in self-awareness, while passivity is reactive. It avoids tension, it avoids confrontation, it prioritizes short-term comfort over long-term respect, and many people confuse the two. They believe that avoiding conflict makes them good, when in reality, it often makes them invisible. The person who never challenges anything, never pushes back, never expresses discomfort, may be seen as easy to deal with, but not as someone who carries weight, because weight comes from presence, from the ability to stand in your truth even when it creates tension, and tension, when handled properly, is not destructive, it is clarifying. It reveals what is real and what is not. There is also a deeper psychological layer to this. People respect those who respect themselves, not through words, but through behavior, through consistency, through the way they handle situations. And when your behavior shows that you are willing to tolerate disrespect to avoid discomfort, it sends a message, not just to others, but to yourself, that your standards are flexible. And once your standards are flexible, your value becomes negotiable. But when your behavior shows that you are willing to walk away, willing to say no, willing to create distance when necessary, it sends a different message, one of self-respect, and that message is felt, even if it is not spoken, because human interaction is not just about words. It is about signals, patterns, and consistency, and people respond to those signals more than they respond to what you say. One of the hardest but most important realizations is this: not everyone will like you when you become more defined. Not everyone will agree with your boundaries. Not everyone will stay when you stop being convenient, and that is not a failure. It is a filter. It is the natural process of removing what does not align with who you are becoming. And while that process can feel like loss, it is actually making space for something more stable. Because relationships built on convenience are fragile, they depend on you staying the same, staying agreeable, staying available. But relationships built on respect are different. They adapt, they adjust, they recognize your boundaries and still choose to stay, not because you are easy, but because you are real. And real connection is always more valuable than comfortable connection. Another important shift is moving from seeking approval to establishing standards. When you seek approval, your behavior is shaped by external validation. You adjust based on how others respond. You feel good when accepted, and uncertain when challenged. But when you operate from standards, your behavior is shaped by internal clarity. You know what aligns with you, what does not, and you act accordingly, regardless of immediate reaction. This does not mean ignoring feedback or becoming rigid. It means having a stable foundation that is not easily shaken by every opinion. Because if your sense of self depends entirely on how others perceive you, then your stability will always be temporary, always fluctuating, always dependent on something outside your control. And this is where many nice people struggle. They have spent so much time adapting to others that they no longer know what their own standards are, what they truly want, what they truly value. Because their identity has been shaped by reaction, not reflection, and breaking out of that pattern requires time, awareness, and the willingness to sit with discomfort while redefining yourself. You begin by paying attention to what drains you, what frustrates you, what feels misaligned, not as something to ignore, but as information, as signals pointing to where your boundaries need to be stronger. And as you start responding to those signals instead of suppressing them, your behavior begins to change, not drastically, not all at once, but gradually, consistently. You say no when it matters, you step back when needed, you stop engaging in dynamics that feel one-sided, and with each decision, your sense of self becomes clearer, more defined, more stable, and that stability becomes visible to others, not through what you say, but through how you move, how you respond, how you carry yourself. Because in the end, respect is not created through performance. It is created through alignment. When your actions, your words, and your boundaries all reflect the same internal clarity, people feel it, they recognize it, and even if they do not fully understand it, they respond to it differently, because it signals something they cannot easily influence, something that does not shift based on convenience. And once you reach that point, something changes. You stop trying to be everything for everyone. You stop adjusting yourself to fit every situation. You stop sacrificing your truth to maintain approval, and instead, you begin to exist in a way that is consistent, grounded, and self-defines, and that is where respect begins to grow. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence now reflects something solid, something clear, something that cannot be easily shaped or overlooked. The truth is, you were never meant to become hard. You were meant to become clear. Clear about what you allow, clear about what you refuse, clear about who gets access to you and who does not, clear about the difference between being kind and being easy to use, because those are not the same. A truly kind person can say no, can walk away, can set limits, can protect their energy without losing their humanity, but a person who is only nice often sacrifices themselves to maintain peace, and that peace is built on quiet resentment and invisible exhaustion. Nice people do not lose respect because kindness is weak. They lose respect because kindness without boundaries becomes permission, because empathy without awareness becomes self-neglect, because patience without standards becomes silent approval, and because love without self-respect becomes something others feel allowed to misuse. And once you see this clearly, you begin to understand that your problem was never that you cared too much. Your problem was that you did not protect what you cared about, including yourself. You were taught that being good meant being available, that being understanding meant tolerating everything, that being mature meant staying silent. But those beliefs were never designed to protect you. They were designed to make you easier to handle, easier to manage, easier to keep in a role that benefits others more than it benefits you. And the moment you begin to question those beliefs, the moment you begin to step out of that role, everything starts to change. You start noticing how often you were giving without being asked, how often you were saying yes out of pressure, how often you were staying in situations that drained you, not because you wanted to, but because you felt obligated, and that awareness is uncomfortable, because it forces you to face how much of your life was shaped by fear, not choice. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of losing connection. But that awareness is also powerful because once you see it, you can no longer ignore it. From that point on, your decisions begin to shift. Slowly at first, you pause before agreeing. You question whether something truly aligns with you. You start valuing your time differently, your energy differently, your attention differently. And as you do this, people will notice. Some will respect it, some will resist it, some will question it, and some will walk away. And that is where growth is tested. Not in what you understand, but in what you maintain. Because it is easy to set boundaries once, it is difficult to maintain them consistently, especially when others push back, especially when guilt appears, especially when you feel the urge to return to what is familiar. But consistency is what transforms your behavior into identity, and identity is what shapes how others see you over time. You are not trying to prove anything to anyone anymore. You are not trying to convince people of your worth. You are not trying to explain every decision so it feels acceptable. You are simply acting in alignment with what you know is right for you, and that quiet alignment carries more power than any explanation ever could. As you continue on this path, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You stop feeling the need to be understood by everyone. You stop chasing validation from those who never truly valued you. You stop investing energy into relationships that require you to shrink, and instead, you begin to invest in yourself, in your growth, in your clarity, in your direction. And with that shift, the people around you begin to change, not because you forced them to, but because your behavior no longer supports the same dynamics. Those who respected you will grow closer. Those who depended on your lack of boundaries will feel the distance. And those who never valued you will fade away. And while that process may feel like loss, it is actually refinement. It is the removal of what was never stable to begin with. Because real connection does not require you to abandon yourself. Real respect does not require you to constantly prove your worth. Real relationships do not depend on you being endlessly available. They are built on mutual understanding, mutual respect, and mutual boundaries. And when those things are present, you do not have to force anything. You do not have to perform. You do not have to constantly adjust yourself to maintain harmony. You begin to experience something different. a sense of stability that does not depend on how others treat you, a sense of clarity that does not shift with every opinion, a sense of self that remains intact even when circumstances change. And that stability becomes the foundation of your presence. It becomes the reason people take you seriously, not because you demand respect, but because your behavior reflects it. You are no longer the person who can be easily influenced, easily persuaded, easily pulled in different directions. You are someone who listens, who considers, but who ultimately decides based on your own standards. And that level of self-direction is what creates real power, not control over others, but control over yourself. And when you have that, everything changes. Your relationships become more intentional. Your time becomes more structured. Your energy becomes more focused. And your presence becomes more grounded. Not loud, not aggressive, but steady. And steadiness is something people instinctively respect because it is rare. Most people are reactive. Most people are influenced by every situation, every emotion, every opinion. But when you are not, when you remain consistent, clear, and grounded, people feel it, even if they cannot explain it, and that feeling changes how they interact with you. So understand this clearly. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to lose your kindness. You do not need to become cold or distant. You simply need to stop abandoning yourself in the process of being good. You need to stop giving your energy where it is not respected. You need to stop explaining yourself to those who benefit from misunderstanding you. And you need to start choosing yourself consistently, without guilt. Because in the end, respect is not something you ask for. It is something your behavior communicates. It is something your boundaries reinforce. It is something your consistency builds over time. And once that foundation is in place, everything else follows naturally. You will notice it in small ways, in how people speak to you, in how they respond to your decisions, in how they consider your time, and those small shifts are not accidental. They are the result of the change you made within yourself. So from this moment on, let this be your rule. Be kind, but not blind. Be generous, but not limitless. Be understanding, but not at the cost of your self-respect. Because the strongest person in the room is not the one who gives the most. It is the one whose presence cannot be taken for granted. And when you reach that point, when your kindness is no longer something people can use, but something they must respect, you will realize something important. You did not lose your goodness. You finally gave it the structure it needed to protect you, and that is where your real power begins.